Welcome back, dear listeners, to the firelight. It seems the shadows have drawn you in once more. I am your host, the keeper of the Scriptorium Obscura, and tonight, the flames have chosen a story that has waited far too long to be told. So, pour yourself a dark drink, ensure the doors are locked, the windows drawn tight. The night beyond is vast and hungry, and before this tale ends, you may begin to understand why. Tonight's account comes from a man named Elias Venn, a tracker born of the northern pines, and the last surviving heir of a family burdened by an ancient curse. A curse that began the night his grandfather was torn apart by something not quite man and not quite beast. You've read the title. You already know the promise. Tonight, Elias tells us what it means to track the same Wendigo that killed his grandfather. Welcome back to Scriptorium Obscura. If you've stumbled upon this fire for the first time, remember to subscribe and ring the bell so the next tale finds you before the dark does. My name is Elias Venn, and though the blood that runs through my veins is mine, I swear, sometimes it feels like it belongs to the woods. I was born in northern Ontario, not the kind you see on postcards, not the lakes and the campsites. I mean the places beyond the roads, where the map becomes rumor, and the only law is the cold. My grandfather, Jonas Venn, was the first man I ever saw kill something with his bare hands. He was not a cruel man, but the kind who carried violence like a scent. He hunted for fur and meat, but there was one thing he hunted for reason, and that reason was vengeance. He used to tell me stories when I was a boy, sitting beside this same kind of fire. Stories about something that lived between the pines, something that wore the shape of a man, but smelled like carrion and winter rot. He said it had eyes like mirrors, and that when it spoke, it borrowed your own voice to do it. I thought he was just scaring me. A good northern ghost story, but he'd sharpen his knife while he told it. Every night, slow, circular motions like he was preparing for a war he already knew he'd lose. He called it the Wendigo, not a Wendigo, as if there was only one, the same one that haunted his father, and his father's father before him. He said it was our family's burden, that one day it would come for us all. Elias, he told me, the Wendigo doesn't hunt for food. It hunts for what you love, because that's what it took from me. He never told me the full story, not until the winter he died. It was January of '98. I was 12. The snow came early that year, and it came heavy, thick enough to swallow fences whole. The cold had teeth. Grandfather went out before dawn that morning. Said he'd seen tracks near the old trap line, something too large to be a wolf. He took his rifle, his knife, and his flask of rye. By sunset, he hadn't come back. My father said we'd wait until morning to search, but I couldn't sleep. Something in my gut twisted. You know that instinct that lives below logic? The part that doesn't care about reason, only survival? That's the one that whispered to me that night. So I took the lantern, and I went after him. The forest at night doesn't sound the same. It doesn't breathe the way it does in the day. It holds its breath, listening, I followed the trail past the ridge, through the birch grove where the trees grow too close together, so close their branches scratch like fingernails. And that's where I found it, a shape half buried in the snow. First I thought it was him, but it was his rifle, snapped clean in two. There were drag marks in the snow, and something darker soaking through the white. I followed them until I saw him. He was hanging, half off the ground, tangled in the roots of an upturned pine. His chest was open, his ribs split like the wings of a bird, and his eyes were gone. I didn't scream. I don't think I could. I just stood there, watching the steam rise from what was left of him. And then I heard it, a voice, soft, behind me, Eli. It was my grandfather's voice, but he was already dead. I turned and saw movement between the trees, something tall, thin, too thin. The light from the lantern caught it for just a second, and what I saw still follows me in every shadow I've ever stood in since. His mouth was too wide, its skin stretched so tight you could see the skull beneath, and its eyes reflected me. I ran. God help me, I ran. I didn't stop until I saw the cabin lights through the trees. When I burst through the door, I couldn't speak, just dropped to my knees and vomited blood onto the floorboards. By morning, when they went to look, there was no body, no rifle, no tracks, just snow. And when they asked me what I saw, I said nothing, because I knew they wouldn't believe me, and because deep down, I already knew the truth. The Wendigo had come for him, and it wasn't finished. They buried an empty coffin. My father swore he'd never set foot in those woods again, but he carried the same haunted look my grandfather did, a kind of awareness, like the darkness was watching from just beyond the firelight. He started drinking not long after, and by the time I was 17, he put a shotgun in his mouth and ended the family line, or so everyone thought. But I didn't end it. I continued it. You see, some sons inherit land, some inherit names. I inherited an unfinished hunt. Slow inhale, whisper, and I swore, to finish it. If you've made it this far, traveler, you already feel the chill Elias spoke of. But his story doesn't end with blood in the snow. No, it only begins there. What would you have done that night, standing before the thing that wore your grandfather's face? Would you have run or followed it into the dark? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because when the wind howls again, Elias will follow it. Years pass differently in the north. You don't count them by birthdays or calendars. You count them by winters survived. And I'd survived 15 of them, since the night my grandfather died. After my father's death, I left the house behind, sold the land to a mining company for half of what it was worth, and took what little I could carry, a rifle, a knife, a compass, and the one thing my grandfather left me that mattered, his journal. It wasn't much to look at, a leather-bound book, stained by oil and blood, with pages filled in a hand that was half writing, half obsession. But inside were his records. Every sign, every clue, every encounter he'd had with the creature. It wasn't myth to him. It was a species, an apex predator that defied anatomy. He'd cataloged its habits, its migrations, its hunger cycles, and something I'd never seen mentioned in any folktale. The Wendigo does not die. It moves from body to body, from soul to soul, a hunger wearing human skin. I read that line so many times the ink began to fade, and the more I read, the more I realized the thing that killed my grandfather was not bound to the woods of Ontario. It had moved north, and if I wanted to end it, I'd have to follow. So I learned. I spent years with trappers, hunters, and the Cree elders who still remembered the old stories, not the ones you hear in museums or textbooks, but the ones whispered under breath, as though saying them aloud might summon something listening in the dark. They told me the Wendigo is not a beast that comes from the forest. It comes from the hunger of man himself, born from greed, from starvation, from the breaking point where a person eats another, and something ancient sees that act and takes notice, and once it marks you, you are never alone again. One elder, a woman named Niska, told me something that haunted me for years. You do not hunt a Wendigo, you invite it. The moment you decide to follow its trail, it already knows your scent. I asked her what she meant. She just smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and said, "You will learn." By the time I reached the Yukon border, I had stopped dreaming in color. Everything in me had gone gray. The forests there are vast, a kingdom of ice and silence, and it was there that I began to find the signs. The first was a deer carcass, half frozen, with its legs bent backward, as if it had tried to kneel before it died. No tracks around it, just drag marks that ended abruptly in the middle of nowhere. The second was a camp, abandoned, a fire still burning low, but no footprints in the snow. Inside one of the tents, I found a torn coat and the smell of rot. The third was harder to explain. It was the voice, came at night, just beyond the tree-line. Always the same tone, low, calm, familiar, called my name, Elias, soft, like the wind learning how to speak. The first time I thought I was imagining it. The second time I answered, because it answered back. It was late February, the kind of cold that makes your breath crystallize midair. I'd set up camp near the frozen river, just south of Dawson. The locals called that place the White Mile because it eats travelers whole. I remember the firelight, the taste of tin can stew, the weight of the rifle against my lap, and then the sound. It wasn't like an animal, too deliberate, too careful. Then came the smell. Rot, copper, wet earth thawing in your nose. I lifted the rifle, aimed toward the dark, and saw 2 points of light staring back at me, silver white, unblinking, and then it spoke. Elias. It sounded like my grandfather, every inflection, every breath. But I watched it move, and no man moves like that. It was tall, too tall. His limbs bent wrong, as though someone had built a human out of deer parts and malice. The skin looked stretched, frostbitten, and yet it was alive, pulsing, crouched low, his head cocking like a bird's. And when it grinned, I saw my own teeth in its mouth. I fired. The shot echoed through the trees, and for a moment, I thought I'd hit it. But when the smoke cleared, the forest was empty. That was the night I realized I wasn't the one doing the hunting anymore. For the next few weeks, I tried to stay ahead of it, moving camp to camp, sleeping in bursts, but the tracks kept following. Sometimes just one set, sometimes mine doubled, and the voice never stopped. It began to whisper not just my name, but other things, things I shouldn't have known, told me where to walk, when to rest, what was waiting ahead. And once, it said something that froze me to the marrow. You have your grandfather's eyes. That's when I found it, the clearing, half buried under snow, a ring of stones blackened with ash. In the center, a cross made from antlers, and nailed to it something human, or what was left of it. The body was stripped to bone, but the skull had been carved. Runic symbols, crude and precise. And on the forehead, burned into the bone, was a word I recognized from my grandfather's journal. Sipakiwin, Cree for becoming. That was when I understood. The Wendigo doesn't just feed. It builds. It grows by transforming what it consumes. And if I stayed in those woods any longer, it would wear my skin next. I burned what I found that night. Every bone, every trace. The air filled with the smell of cooked flesh and snow. And as I watched it burn, I heard it again right behind me, not shouting, not roaring, just whispering, amused. Fire won't save you, boy. That was the first time I ran from it, but not the last. Took a step forward, and I saw what it carried. A locket, my father's, the one he never took off. That was when rage replaced fear. Everything in me, the loss, the grief, the guilt, boiled into one terrible clarity. I fired, staggered back, but didn't fall. The bullet had gone clean through its chest, and it laughed. It doesn't work that way, it hissed. You have to feed it something living. It lunged. We crashed through the table, splinters flying, blood, mine, maybe it's splashing across the snow. I felt claws rake across my side, felt the heat of my own blood steaming in the cold. I drove the knife up under its ribs, the same silver-bladed knife that had belonged to him. And for the first time, I heard it scream, not like an animal, like a man, fell back, clutching the wound, and in its eyes, I saw something flicker, recognition, regret. It reached for me, its voice breaking apart. End it, Elias, before it takes you too. And then it was gone, just gone. The body collapsed into snow and melted like frost under sunlight. In its place, a small bundle of bones and fur. And the locket. I burned the cabin that night, watched the flames eat the walls, the roof, the memories. But as I walked away, I saw something move in the smoke, a reflection, my reflection, and for a moment, its eyes were silver. I made it back to civilization weeks later. The doctor said I was lucky. Frostbite, lacerations, mild hypothermia. But no one asked the real question. What did I bring back with me? I still have the knife. I still have the journal. And at night, when the moon is full, I can feel it, a hunger under my skin. Sometimes I wake up at the edge of the woods, barefoot, with snow on my hands. Sometimes I dream of running, and when I wake, there's blood on the sheets. They say the Wendigo is a curse of greed, of hunger unchecked. But maybe it's simpler. Maybe it's just legacy, a hunger passed down, generation to generation. My grandfather never killed it. He just passed it on to me. And if you're hearing this story now, if you've listened all the way to this point, maybe it's passed to you too, storyteller. And so ends the account of Elias Venn, the last hunter of his bloodline, and perhaps the first of something new. But the story doesn't rest. Not really, for in the Yukon snows, the wind still carries a name, and sometimes when the night grows still enough, you might hear it whisper, Elias. Elias's tale reminds us that hunger takes many forms, and not all of them begin in the stomach. Some begin in the heart, others in the blood. What he found in those woods was not a monster of legend, but the echo of humanity's oldest sin, to consume what we cannot control. He thought he was hunting a creature, but perhaps the Wendigo was only ever hunting for a host. And if you felt it watching you, if for even a moment you thought you heard your own name in the wind, then maybe found one. If you dared to follow Elias tonight, leave a like to let me know. Share this tale with someone who listens to the dark. Someone who understands that folklore is only another word for warning. And, of course, subscribe to Scriptorium Obscura so you don't miss what the flames reveal next. Until then, keep the fire burning, keep the doors locked, and remember, the oldest stories are often the most true.